I've heard many claims over my history. It's probably a little bit more, let's say, with the old times now, but I still hear people say, oh, bro, if it's your macros, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you just got to hit the protein, my guy. And it's like, come on. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I like to think, at least.
It's interesting. So, because we're discussing it with Brian after the podcast, and thank you, Brian, for being on. We appreciate you a lot.
Legend.
It was really enjoyable, and we'll definitely be having him on a lot more. I don't even care if the viewers don't like it, because it hasn't come out yet, unfortunately.
But I'd be surprised if anybody doesn't like it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very interesting conversation.
No, it was. And so we'll be having him on frequently. There's a podcast I listen to called the Revive Stronger podcast, and they have Dr. Mike on I'd say it will be about once a month or so. Now, we're not going to do it as frequently because we don't want to kill Brian, but I'd like to, do it as frequently as possible, really. Would you agree, Matt?
I like to think that Brian is my Dr. Mike.
Yeah. It does kind of feel like that a little bit. But yeah, we're discussing it with Brian post the podcast just because we're such a nerd and 2 hours of chatting about nutrition wasn't enough for the three of us. And yeah, we're kind of talking about how it is more complex than that. But it's kind of one of those ones where it is and it isn't. Would you agree with that?
Kind of.
It just depends on the scope. It depends on which lens you look through. If you look at through a really reverse microscope lens and everything's super blurry and phased out, then yeah, 100% that's IIFYM is true. But if you start to zoom in a bit, then it's like,
I don't really know how to comment on that specific notion. I find that if a your macros has a purpose, but if your goal is to be as optimal or even, let's say, moderately efficient, if you're just focusing on your macros and you're like, the only source of protein I have is protein powder, I'd be like, oh, look, you're probably leaving some stuff on the table, a lot of things on the table where you can receive a lot of benefit from compared to just focusing on purely on macronutrients. Because then in theory, and this is not really what happens in a clinical application, but in theory, if it fits your macros, I only subsist off of straight glucose, protein powder from whey isolate, and then my fat sources is just olive oil. Or we can go full carnivore if you wanted to. We can go glucose from animals, from glycogen stores somehow. If you could harvest that, then you've got saturated fat from lard as your only fat source, and then straight whey protein powder. And I think you of course you're leaving a lot on the table. That screams multiple micronutrient deficiencies to me. But
yeah. So exactly. Obviously, it is more complex than that, without a doubt. But I think, yeah, it's just so interesting. It really is quite complex, and that it really depends who you're talking to. I think there's be a lot of people that need that simplicity whilst they're starting out. And even that is, we see it as very simplistic, but that's still extremely complex to a lot of people, and that would be too much to explain to them. But I don't know, for me, when I hear that, I don't know, would people have an inferior? I'm not talking about the glucose and stuff, but if someone came up to me and said, I'm just having protein powder 5 times a day, every day, my gut feeling would be concerned, but I don't even know really why.
Well, my initial thought goes straight to, I guess, your B vitamins. I'm not entirely sure if that would even be adequate for reaching those micronutrients. And then
most definitely
of the way, let's say, even if it's an isolate, I'd assume that the calcium content is going to be reduced just because it's so isolated. And then you're taking out a bunch of nutrients from that aspect. Yeah,
I'm more talking about from the point of view of they have a pretty much normal diet. So they have, and let's just say they're a vegan as well. Let's really add some complexity to this.
Sure.
Vegan have a pretty normal vegan diet, and it's been super low in protein. They just don't eat much protein at all. So they supplement a fuck ton with protein powder, 5 meals a day.
With like a pea rice combination, or
Nah, it's the only thing they have whey. That's the
okay. They're vegan except for the whey. Sure.
And yeah, for me, there would be alarm bells in my head. I'd be going, oh, I don't love the sound of this. This isn't great. But I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. I've got one little reason in my head, but it's a pretty shitty reason, and it was not very convincing at all. What's going through your head when you're hearing that?
I'm just confused. Yeah, I'm hearing this kind of story. I'm like, okay, why? Where's the logic in? Are you thinking that you're doing the vegan stuff for health reasons, and then are you attributing the kind of vegan improved health outcomes in the short term, by the way, improved health outcomes from that diet? And you're like, oh, I still need to hit my protein because I need to gain muscle because that's for health as well. Because of course, muscle is one of the best indicator for how you will enjoy your life through health span and potentially longevity. Understanding the reasoning why can often pinpoint exactly how we're going to address the situation. I'd be a little bit confused as to what kind of dietary intake they're having if they're vegan and their protein is really low. Because of course, the sources of protein we have, if you are vegan, being legumes, tofu, potentially mushrooms. Then you've got a few different protein sources from some other vegetables, which we wouldn't really consider protein sources. I mean, you could almost argue that legumes aren't a protein source from how low the protein density is. But of course, when we're comparing it to majority of vegetable and kind of rooty foods, they tend to be of the higher variety. Yeah, look, it sounds a bit tricky because then you're cutting out all those foods, and I'm thinking, okay, what else are you having? You're just having like a ton of carrots, or you're having just like potato chips. And look, you can really have a lot of nutrients from potatoes itself, but like, is it super restrictive? What's the rest of the diet we're talking about? Can we actually define the micronutrients that you're deficient in or will be in the next few years? Like, it's pretty sure B12 has a storage in the liver of about 5 years to my memory. So then you'll probably be fine for a good 3, 4, 5 years. And depending on the level of processing that the whey has gone through, you may or may not have some B12 in that. A lot of up in the air at the moment. It's probably just peeling back. Why are we actually doing that?
I guess the question stands as to, because I've heard a lot of people say this before. I've heard people, never online, funnily enough, only ever in person, but I have heard it multiple times, in that people saying, oh, you shouldn't have too much protein powder, you shouldn't rely on it too much. It'd be concerning if you had that much protein powder, or if you had a lot, if you really relied on it a lot. And for me, as someone who, I guess I'm thinking about things, like I'm questioning that, yeah, my gut feeling is I do tend to agree that you shouldn't have too much protein powder in general. But then there's a few questions that come from that of like, why? Like, what's the reasoning behind it? Where would the upper limit lie? And what's different about it to having just chicken breast would be my immediate questions.
Well, let's start peeling back those layers. So I remember we had this discussion when we were specifically doing a presentation, or at least preparing for the presentation, on renal function and its relationship to diet. Apologies for that, Max. That was a little fun event that I had a little bit too much fun in, but you weren't taking that as well as I expected. So we went down the rabbit hole of what does protein actually do to the kidneys, and why does everyone say, or I say everyone, people who are uninformed say that protein leads to kidney damage? How does that work? That doesn't make sense to me. And then we kind of went down, okay, when you ingest protein, it gets broken down to amino acids, and then those amino acids into your bloodstream, and then they do exert a level of, let's say, pressure on your...
Hyperfiltration is the word.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Max. On your, was it your glomerulus? Testing my renal physiology at the moment. They put pressure on your kidneys. Hyperfiltration.
Yeah, keep speaking. It'll come to me. Starts with the end, I'm pretty sure.
So
the end.
In theory, it's, if you had enough protein powder in, and specifically for protein powder in a whey format, because it tends to be more readily absorbed a lot quicker, then in theory, maybe it could cause damage. There's a little bit of evidence to support that if you have reduced renal function and you can ingest high protein meals, that is going to potentially be negative for those kidneys, your cute little nephrons that we need to make sure are nice and healthy.
Nephrons.
Thank you there, Max. And then in that process, do we now extend the assumption that when you have end-stage renal failure, that protein may potentially be negative, which people do flip-flop in terms of those guidelines, by the way, in terms of the actual dietitians. as far as I'm aware. The dietitians that I've spoken to that deal
end
with
stage.
yes.
I feel like that's pretty. Everyone knows that you got to have high protein, right?
High protein in end stage.
Yeah.
Oh, because of the hemodialysis.
Yeah.
Oh yes, okay. Sorry, I take it back. When you're getting to that like stage 3, 4-ish.
Yeah. Stage 4. Yeah.
It's kind of like, okay, well, do we give them high protein or like a moderate amount of protein because they're kind of withering away muscle wise, or do we restrict it because it's potentially better for their nephrons? Often I find that depending on your perspective and what you value, do you value quality of life or do you value length of life? And then, I don't know, it can get a little bit messy in terms of those. Do you have a fly in the room or something?
I think like a fucking plane just flew like right next to my house. That or like a bomb's gone off.
I didn't hear a single thing.
Holy shit, okay.
Oh, impressive. Depending on your perspective of that, I find people can either be in one or the other camp of like 0.6 grams or lower of protein per kilogram, or up to like a 1.2 gram per kilo of protein. Often I find it's not nearly as the high range. It tends to be more around the 0.6 to 1 gram of protein per kilo. Many varying factors included. If we make the assumption that if we have too much protein from a really hyper refined source, can it potentially damage your kidneys and your nephrons? Maybe, theoretically, potentially, but you'd be having to consume like 60, 75% of your total daily energy needs in the form of a really easily absorbed protein source that goes straight to your bloodstream and punches through your kidneys, and then potentially can be excreted into your urine. But I don't see any evidence supporting this. I think time and time again it shows that I haven't seen anything that can potentially show any evidence of that protein intake does negatively impact your renal health when you are quote unquote healthy, when you have an EGFR of, let's say, above 80.
Yeah, look, it does look that way, and it's interesting to say that because that is what the literature supports. I'd just love to speak to someone about it, and I think the good thing is we have the opportunity to hopefully do that now. We can speak to, the plan is to get a renal expert onto the podcast. We should be within the next few months to discuss this very thing, really, because for me, it does seem a little bit weird in my head in that we know the consumption of protein does cause the hyperfiltration of the kidneys and of those nephrons. I'm pretty sure it is. And we also know hyperfiltration and putting them under a lot of stress causes them to be damaged and to die. I don't even know what the correct word is. Is it to die?
Sure, we'll live with that.
Breakdown.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, we've got A equals B equals C here, but the big one is just A equals C kind of thing. Because and this happens a lot, is, it's like the same with, we see it with diabetes as well. So it'd be really good to talk about that, to talk about like, well, if we know this happens, why isn't the literature supporting this kind of thing? But yeah, it's, what was the original thing? Yes. So what would your gut feel? So you're essentially, you're inferring your gut feel if someone was having a lot of protein powder, they could be impacting their kidneys negatively. Is that what you're putting out?
Look, potentially. I'd probably lean on the side of probably not. But I think it's more of an instance of, if there is a situation of dehydration or acute kidney injury, which does occur relatively regularly for most people, they just not aware about it. And it doesn't really matter because they recover normally if you're of a healthy EGFR and nothing else is crazy going on, like your blood glucose is controlled and things along those lines. If in theory that you do have an AKI and then you've got a really high protein intake of really easily absorbed protein that goes straight through your bloodstream down into your kidneys and out potentially as urine, there may be a little bit of additional damage that's caused to your kidneys, and you may not recover as you normally would from an AKI. It's a bit tricky, but it's also like, okay, well, if we're having just whey protein, why aren't we having other foods? Are we at a point where we can't chew foods? And then why are we? Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts that will go through my mind. It's okay. Well, what do you? Is it because it's cheaper? Because that's potentially an avenue which I can actually see justification for. It's like, okay, yeah, cool. I'm just having it because it's cheaper. I'm like, okay, maybe can we include maybe a casein protein or something along those lines, and then can we adjust for the micronutrients that we're potentially not getting from red meats and from chicken and things along those lines? Can we cover that? We have some protein sources from, like, let's say nuts or something like that, that we're getting some additional micronutrients, zinc, selenium, potentially. Things along and similar to that, that's ticking off some more boxes rather than just, hey, I need to hit my protein, I need to get my muscle growth goals, but you're potentially limiting your muscle growth and, let's say, healing rate if you don't supply yourself with the micronutrients that you need. And key point on micro, you don't need a lot of them. You only need a little bit of these micronutrients in very small quantities. It's not like you need to eat a whole nail of iron to get your iron nutrients. I mean, unless you're massively deficient, and then you can stick it in an apple, and then that might help or something like this. Have you seen that before, Max? It's quite interesting. Remember to check the link in the description or our website for our consultations. Back to it.
There was, some really, really generous people, would have been a few years back, and they were putting these pins in the apples at Woolies. And they were just so just really thoughtful, because they were just trying to help, trying
to help out. And then people took it the complete wrong way.
I know.
They're just trying to solve the massive crisis that is iron deficiency anemia, especially among our developing female teenagers. Very tricky, Max. How do we try to convince these? I was more so referring to apparently one of the better interventions way back when. I can't even remember what this time period would be. Probably like early 1900s ish. They used to stick iron nails in apples. The iron would leach out into the apple, and then you would consume that in the attempt to improve your total iron intake. But of course, this was non-heme iron, so it kind of helped a little bit, but not amazingly. And then we eventually got to the point where we have adequate supplementation and infusions now, which are a lot better. Not that I say you would need to have those apple irons, but have you seen the more recent? I think I've seen it on social media a couple of times. You got like the iron fish.
Never.
So the same logic behind when you cook in an cast iron pan, how the iron will leach out into the food, and then you consume that iron in the food, and called bingo bango bongo, potentially improving your iron. That's a hot tip, by the way. If you're looking to improve your iron and you add a bit of a crossroads, nothing else helping, potentially cooking on a cast iron pan might help it with more acidic foods. Potentially. Look, your mileage may vary, and there's a few different reasons behind that. The same thing goes for these iron fish. So you'll cook in a normal pot, because cast iron tends to be a little bit more expensive nowadays. These iron fish, you just chuck it in, and then when you're cooking along, the iron would leach out into the food, and then of course you're absorbing that through the food. But I think it's important to pair that with a heme source of iron, potentially some vitamin C to increase absorption and bioavailability, a few different factors, spreading that throughout the day, so potentially you're not getting a lot of iron in one go and maybe causing some GI discomfort. I'd be surprised if you get any GI discomfort from that kind of iron dosage though.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, look, I've never heard of any of those things, so that's really good to know.
I just like the idea of a little fishy swimming around in my food.
It kind of feels like, I think the thing for iron that feels a little bit depressing for me is that men basically don't, I feel like you just talk to such a small percentage of the population, and the reason being is that men basically don't have any issues with their iron. I think, would it be fair to say it's very rare with most men to have issues with their iron levels?
It's more uncommon, but specifically for children, full stop. So iron tends to be one of the key nutrients that children can be quite deficient in, especially if they're not having a wide variety of iron-rich sources, specifically heme iron. So heme iron from animals, red meat sources, things similar to that. And then, but especially if they're of a vegetarian or vegan variety, you can see stunting in growth, failure to thrive, a whole rabbit hole, potentially arguing for the introduction of either supplementation and or additional, let's say, medical interventions. We see it more common in the Indian and vegetarian communities, can be quite problematic in some instances, and then lead to a few different things. Fatigue is one of our major things. And then, of course, unable to stay awake means unable to study, unable to learn. Our brains can't thrive properly. It's a whole rabbit hole which we should just ideally avoid as much as possible.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Yeah. I guess for me, the thing about the iron is that, yeah, look, you're absolutely right. There is a significant amount of people that do need to focus on it. But from my pessimistic side of looking at iron, and I'm probably wrong, is that I feel like basically half the population of men don't really care about it too much because they've never had any issues with their iron levels. And then you've obviously got older people, so they don't really fall into the same bracket because it's a mixed bag. And then you got women, and I feel like a lot of women, they almost feel so hopeless about their iron because it's so difficult to eat enough to meet levels that are actually enable them to be, what's the opposite of deficient? Like satisfied.
Sufficient, meeting requirements.
Sufficient. Yeah, meeting the requirements. And I think a lot of them as well, is this even a thing that a lot of them can't even if they were eating enough iron, their body can't even absorb enough to keep up with the amount of iron they need?
Yeah, look, I can't, I'm unsure of that one. It seems like that it's potentially, and I'm very happy to be proven wrong in this situation. It seems like in those instances where prescribing potentially a supplement per day, which is most likely non-heme source, and then we're calling it a day, and they're having it with their cereal in the morning, so the calcium's competing for absorption as well. And it's like, well, you obviously, you can't help your iron at all. You have to have an iron infusion. It's like, hold up. We've just given someone an iron that's not easily absorbed, and then potentially too much of it, so it's just going to cause GI discomfort. And then we're pairing it with a calcium source, so it's going to impede absorption and compete for that absorption into the bloodstream. So we're taking out from our calcium sources, which is really difficult to meet normally on a daily basis, and we're reducing the absorption of that iron, which is already low. And then we're not pairing it with a vitamin C source so that it can increase absorption. And then we're not spreading it throughout the day in multiple different instances, because of course, if you're having, it's the same idea of like how much protein can you absorb in one meal, by the way, it's all of it, but it's more so of, is spreading the iron throughout the day in multiple different instances going to be more productive for your iron absorption overall in total compared to having all in one go? It's like if I was to do a full body workout one day a week and then expect to have the same level of growth and gains over multiple days of session of progressive overload. Doesn't really make too much sense to me. I think there's a lot of areas left on the table before jumping straight to the iron infusions.
So it's interesting because I was under the impression it was the opposite, that it wasn't true. But you're alluding to that it would be a good idea to have several meals throughout the day with iron in them.
Well, I think definitely several meals with iron, but potentially even having the iron supplementation, if we're at that point, in multiple separate times and pairing it with food. Because I'm under the assumption that, of course, if you're eating it with food, specifically acidic foods and vitamin C sources, that you can dramatically increase the absorption. If we're going to do that multiple times throughout the day, it's going to lead to less GI discomfort if you have that kind of thing with iron, which can be quite common with supplementation, and then potentially improve our iron results in the positive direction. This is not going to work for everyone. Absolutely not. But it's potentially another avenue which I don't really see explored very often. It sounds like it's kind of, you see a medical professional, they go, oh, you have an iron supplement. Cool, has an iron supplement, doesn't do anything. Oh, okay, cool. Now we have to inject you with iron. It's like, we had a whole area which we haven't explored just then. That's like saying, I've seen a dietitian for one single session, didn't work. Now I've got to go get half my bowel resected because I need to lose weight immediately. It's like, hold up, mate. You got so much left on the table. We haven't even scratched the surface in terms of all the amazing things that we can do and all the different avenues we can explore. It's just jumping from 0 to 100 very quickly from my perspective.
Yeah, I know what you mean. This feels like a really hot take to me, what I'm about to say, but I think I really believe it, and it takes some convincing otherwise. But for me, it feels like with these things is that if you are someone who's deficient in iron, which is a decent amount of people, and it's difficult, it's going to take a lot of work for you not to be deficient in iron. You know, the things you're saying is, I'm sure you would agree with me, it is a lot of work. You know,
Absolutely.
It's a lot of work to have to keep that, and mental fatigue is what, you know, like the mental fatigue that comes with that as well is burdensome. You're also fortunate enough to have the option to go to Medicare and get a free iron infusion because we live in Australia. For me, at least, and the way I've been thinking recently is that just take it. Just don't worry about all that stuff. If you got the option and there's no negative side effects that come along with having this, just do it, man. Just do it. And then you can worry about, instead of having to worry, spend your whole day worrying about, I didn't have my iron tablet this morning. And now you're freaking out about all these little things that don't even matter. Worry about things that actually do matter in your life. And whatever that may be, loving your family or looking after your kids or growing a business or whatever things actually matter, rather than doing something in your life that could be avoided and you're just doing it because you have some self-righteous thing of that I need to do it the natural way rather than the artificial way. It's kind of like the same way I feel about weight loss medication as well, in that why are you making things harder for yourself? Just do it, and it's easier, so you can focus on, instead of busting your balls trying to lose weight, make weight loss easier and bust your balls doing something else.
I don't disagree. That's a really great hot take. I think everything you've mentioned is the other side of the conversation that I haven't said yet. So well done in kind of undoing that one. That was really good. I completely agree. So here's the other side of what I was not saying. These are all potentially great avenues that we can explore for potentially looking to provide and increase your total iron in your bloodstream throughout the kind of day without medical intervention of intravenous administration of iron through an iron infusion. But then again, like, why not? Is there something about the iron infusion that really doesn't hit for you? Do you have, and it's quite common to have some side effects from the iron infusion, but of course they tend to be of the temporary variety. There's often not many major side effects that I can really think of. There's a potential increase in total oxidative stress, but I would probably put that to more of an acute situation rather than an extended, prolonged. So as long as you don't have headaches, nausea, vomiting, metallic taste in the mouth, muscle or joint pains, dizziness, lightheadedness, allergic reactions, chest pain, palpitations, I'm just listing them off at this point. As long as everything's fine and you don't have, let's say, a massive needle allergy, a massive needle fear, phobia, why wouldn't you just go get the iron infusion? Exactly like you said, Max. And the same point applies to things like weight loss medications, Ozempic, semaglutide, Saxenda, things like that. If it helps us get to a point where we can then focus on our health from a perspective of, okay, biggest fish out of the room, need to tick off the iron or need to tick off the weight loss. Now I can focus on actually exercising, because before I was at the point where I physically couldn't. I didn't have the energy, or I didn't have the ability to, there was limitations in place. We've now just opened so many doors and have such an amazing position of different avenues we can go down. It's like, okay, well, why didn't I just do that in the first place?
Yeah, it does. I think people, it's more around the stigma around that you need to do things the natural way, or for me, it more feels like that. There's the societal pressures for whatever reason. And maybe the reason's pretty obvious, in the sense that people, if you've someone that's struggled to lose weight a lot, and it kind of feels like for some reason people deem you as cheating or whatever it is, I can't really wrap my head around why there's so much negative attention around it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's just another medical thing that people have to do. And often I find that popping a little supplement on a daily basis tends to be a little bit less, let's say, mentally taxing on some people. I think it depends on the individual. There's two different avenues that I'd like to explore further from this conversation. Did you want to add anything before we jump around?
I'm really happy, because the next time I talk about Ozempic or weight loss medication with someone, I'm so going to bring up the analogy of iron infusions. When they come to me going that, oh no, it's cheating or whatever it is, I'm like, oh, so you think iron infusions are cheating as well? Yeah. No. Oh, yeah. Anyway, we'll get going.
We have two different avenues. One avenue could be, why is natural better, quote unquote, and then do naturopaths actually have an opinion that I should listen to? And then the other avenue is return on investment. Which one would you like to go down first?
Let's go the ROI.
Sure. Return on investment. I'm busting myself, trying to improve my iron levels. I'm having iron fortified cereals twice a day. I'm having my supplement multiple times. I'm not having any calcium sources with my cereals. I'm having my Nutrigrain with water. I'm having multiple supplements throughout the day. My GI isn't amazing. I'm still not at a point where I find myself my iron levels to be satisfactory. It's still just below the let's say the healthy range.
Does Nutrigrain have zinc in it
I'm not entirely sure.
or magnesium? Because they would all compete, right?
Ooh,
Zinc,
what a
'cause
great
I'm
point.
pretty
You're testing
sure-
my knowledge there.
Because look, I'm not sure, because the iron is Fe2 plus, right?
Yes.
So from my understanding, what the competing things are, and this might be way too simplistic, but I'm pretty sure all the things that are 2 plus what competes with it. So calcium Ca2 plus, iron's Fe2 plus, magnesium's Mg2 plus, zinc's Zn2 plus. So they're all 2 plus, which are the things that also compete with each other. So I'm obviously you're just giving examples, so I'm not trying to fucking ruin your example. I'm just putting it out there as like, is this a like genuinely, is that's a genuine question on my hand?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't disagree. I think they would have an interaction to a certain point and potentially limitation. My initial thoughts are that maybe iron and magnesium and zinc and magnesium would potentially have a little bit more of an impact. Magnesium tends to be one of those things that's quite impacted in terms of absorption.
Okay.
I think just off the top of my head, all I'm really aware of is that calcium and iron have a very strong relationship in terms of
Cool.
that really impacts the absorption. But a great point. I'm not entirely sure if zinc is fortified in your cereals. I'd have to go back and assess what the Australian government stance on fortification in foods, cereals, and breads are.
Yeah, I don't know either. Anyway, keep going, my man.
Return on investment. I'm doing all these things. Stress out my head. I can't get it to increase. My outcome is it's increasing, but nowhere near to the point where it's in like a healthy range, in quotation marks, like within normal standard distribution. Is that return of my investment of a lot of work on a daily basis from my perspective?
Yeah.
Is that worth me doing that? Or is having potentially, let's say I have a phobia of needles, is having a phobia of needles and getting an iron infusion for maybe whatever, however long it takes, a few minutes to get the iron infusion, is that worth more than the return on investment for doing things in quote unquote the natural way?
Yeah. Well, I guess that's exactly the point, and that's comes down to everyone. I mean, it's like you could speak to a person with diabetes and they say, "Man, it's just not worth it. I have to work so hard to check my blood glucose levels, track the amount of food I'm eating, the amount of carbs I'm eating, etc. It's just so much hard work." And it's like, man, it's just not worth the investment I'm putting in. It's like, so you're gonna die? Like, what do you mean it's not worth it? Like, you don't really have a choice. Unless you want to die, it's just what you got to do. So I guess it does kind of come down to that, is that you just got to, that's for me, what I was thinking about and what I've been thinking about for a long time. I think I mentioned it maybe last week, is that the world is literally run on cost benefit analysis, which is the same as return on investment, really. And that's the exact same thing. I mean, you run the cost benefit analysis in your head, and so for something like diabetes, where we don't yet have a thing that's going to make it easier, so like you still have to manually do it all yourself, basically. Sorry, if we were to rewind 20 years ago, where you had to do it all manually yourself, that's to inject yourself, track everything yourself. If someone 20 years ago was like, I invented this thing where you can just essentially keep it around your arm, or like wherever people with diabetes keep it on themselves now, like around their hip or whatever it is, and it just does everything for you. It injects the insulin for you. It does everything for you, so you basically don't need to think about it as much anymore. Everyone's like, fuck yeah, like of course I'm going to do that. Like that's not, it's not cheating or anything. It's just an easier solution for me that technology has provided for us.
Quick ad break, guys. Remember to click the first link in the description to check out our dietitian consultations and services. Back to it.
It's interesting how you've mentioned that. So what I commonly see with everyone, including myself, is we're always looking for the easiest path. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. Why would you opt for the harder path that's potentially going to lead you to expend more resources, either time, money, stress, mental capacity, to get to the same point? And then when you're at that point, can you reassess? Does it still cost you the same amount of those resources to maintain the level that you've achieved? And then it's tricky, but I find that people often still fall for things that are too good to be true. Like we've got fat burners. The amount of people that I see coming to me on like fat burners, some random pill that got from some Joe Blow or some random supplement store. And I'm like, they can only keep it on the shelves because it raises your body temperature by like 0.01 degrees. And that
exactly.
theoretically burns more energy on a daily basis, but you're not going to see that benefit. It's like you can take one less step a day and you'll be burning the same amount of energy. So it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that is an interesting contrast. Sorry?
Majoring in the minor.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting contrast because, it's weird that people are. I don't think we're at a point now where people don't believe that Ozempic and stuff like that or weight loss medication works. I think it's more of a point where now that people understand it does work, it's more at a point where they need to come up with a new excuse as to why you shouldn't take it.
Yeah, Ozempic face or side effects or effort. You're not manly enough to do it the proper way or some stupid shit like that. Yeah, it's like, come on.
Exactly, yeah.
Grow
it's
a
like
pair and realize that it's doing it the easier way. It's probably going to be better for everyone.
Yeah. The goalposts shift just because it's like when the fat burner stuff didn't work, everyone was happy to get on the bandwagon and be like, yeah, pretty shitty, doesn't work, doesn't do anything, there's no point. And everyone was in agreement with that, really. But now we found something that does work. It's like, well, I guess you get to see who truly actually cares about helping people and maybe who doesn't. I don't know. Oh, no, that's probably unfair to say.
I think people can convince themselves that they're doing it to help people in the same way that I guess the evidence that I view and assess to be usable in a clinical application, I believe that is helping people. Yep. But I guess you could also put it from the same perspective of anything unnatural is not helping. But we can go down the whole rabbit hole in a second.
Yeah.
But just to clarify my stance on Ozempic and semaglutide and injectable appetite suppressants, they're a very valuable tool. They can be used in combination with exercise, nutrition, recovery, lifestyle overall. In isolation, they're not going to provide you the benefit you want, and they potentially will be a band-aid on a bigger problem. And then I think it's very important to note that unless we do pair it in combination with those aspects I prior mentioned, when we get to the point where we're quote unquote happy, that magic number that apparently came out of nowhere that you've thought of in your mind, let's say 90 kilos, once we get to that 90 kilos, are we actually happy? And then can we maintain that from moving forward? Because without that additional intervention, the combination approach, I find it very difficult for people to maintain what they have without having to stay indefinitely on the medication. So a tool that can be very useful, but a tool nonetheless. We don't want to use a chainsaw if we're 4 years old and this is the first time we're picking up a knife and a fork. Like, choose our tools appropriately.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's not that you can't learn a lot. Of course you can learn a lot by losing the weight, but I think it's also good to be realistic about that. The medications to help weight loss was not the same as an iron infusion in the sense that you actually do have to do things to still lose a weight. You can't just take it and the weight falls off you. You actually do have to. It's just an assistance. It's like if you were running a 100-meter sprint and you just had like Usain Bolt behind you, just like gently pushing you back. You're just like chilling. It's like, here you go. Like, here's a little help kind of thing. And like, would you say that's a fair analogy?
Yeah, absolutely. At the current point of the medication's development, that's where we are at. In the next 20 years, it'll get to a point, I think, that it's going to be
for sure
much let's say less side effects and
whereas like the iron infusion is much more like you're on Usain Bolt's shoulders, like you've got a piggyback ride and he's just carrying you along kind of thing. It's like you don't need to do anything. You just rock up. You just rock up, get your infusion and leave. Like, and you don't need to change anything at all.
How tall is Usain Bolt?
I think it's 6'2" or something like that.
6'2". So with me on his shoulders, we'd be like 6'6". That'd be fun. I like just go bolting down the street.
I'm officially going to say 6'4". 6'4". How tall is Usain Bolt?
Usain Bolt is 196 centimeters.
Is that a no-go from Dr. Siri?
196 centimeters in 2 feet.
It's 6.43 feet.
Good job, Max. Very good job. What is natural? Is Usain Bolt naturally that tall, or do you think he got calf extensions?
I think he's naturally that tall.
Yeah, cheeky bugger.
I
Cheeky
know.
bugger.
I know you don't believe in that, but people can be that tall.
No, it's impossible. I've never seen someone taller than me in my entire life. You know, all going through all high school, when people called me Mario, I assumed it was because of my Italian heritage. It's really just because I'm insane at fitting through pipes. Talking about natural items,
Yeah.
I don't understand why people make a business out of selling quote unquote natural products when if you refine something enough, you put it into a pill form, the only difference between, let's say, a supplement and a medication is the amount it works and the side effects.
Yep.
What's the difference? My brain doesn't work with that. So if you go in to see someone who claims to be holistic and has your best interest in mind, but oh hey, I've got a Herbalife company as well, and you can buy my supplements that are 50 times the normal price of a standard supplement, but it's going to be good for you, I swear. Like, yeah, sure, if you're deficient in something, that is any supplement that's going to have the same dosage and is approved by the TGA, sure, not a problem at all. But like, it's still the same class in my head as like it's a medication and a supplement. What is natural? And then if I was to describe natural, like anything that contains carbon.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. The whole natural one is an interesting philosophical question, without a doubt. It's something that is worth exploring, and it'd be good to talk to someone with all this stuff. It'd be good to talk to someone that actually knows what they're talking about. Someone philosophical that you could talk to about what natural actually, how you could define it and how you could distinguish things that are natural and unnatural. But I feel like for me, when I'm looking at those things from a supplement and vitamin perspective, I guess the argument would be from the naturopaths is that what they're providing is essentially side effect free, more or less, or in the sense that the side effects that you get from it is the effect.
Okay.
Like, I guess like the whole point would be that every, like, a side effect is, again, I don't know whether I'm just like delusional right now or I'm actually kind of making sense, but every medication is only side effects.
I mean, you kind of delusional, kind of not delulu. There's a main effect that we're looking for. It's paired with other effects that are less favorable, and we apply an attribution of it's a side effect now. But look, if you think that nausea is a positive thing when you get Ozempic, then I mean, it's just pros from there.
It just kind of feels like semantics for me, and maybe I'm being too weird about it, but they're all just effects, essentially. Just from taking certain things, you get effects, and some of them are wanted, some of them are not wanted, kind of thing. And I guess from the natural side of things, they would just say all the effects that you get are all going to be wanted effects, basically. I think that would be what they would say.
I think that's a potentially a foolish perspective, because even I'm aware that foods are not all positive. Like, everyone regards blueberries as potentially a superfood, whatever that means. But I'm well aware that blueberries do not contain a complete protein to the point where I'd be satisfied in having only blueberries for my entire diet. So that's a con of blueberries that I can't apply to the rest of my diet. That's displacing something else. But I can have it in terms of amazing source of antioxidants, amazing source of a few different vitamins and minerals. And it's a great inclusion into my diet, but I'd be foolish into thinking that it can replace my chicken breast or my legumes or potentially my red meat or things along those lines. There's pros and cons to everything, even supplements, especially supplements. Majority of the cons tend to be in the form of draining your wallet, but that's just the kind of industry that we're in at the moment. We're looking for that low cost investment that will get us the result that we're wanting. It just so happens to be that low cost investment is a lot of money, and the result we're wanting is just replaced with a placebo that's actually giving the results that we think.
I would consider that worth it, though. If I bought something that I truly believed in and I got a placebo from it and it significantly improved my life, I'd consider that worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. If it's gone to the point where I can actively feel better and it's not causing major harm or potentially having massive side effects for the rest of my life overall, why wouldn't you keep doing it? Like I often hear that argument from, let's say, other health professionals that talk shit on, let's say, naturopaths or supplement pushers. Like, well, they're not actually doing any good because you can just go down the shops and get it yourself. I'm like, yeah, but there's something about an experience for someone where they're potentially convinced and or convince themselves that it's going to produce a really great health outcome that is more valuable than the product itself. And then I think that's a massive positive of it. I feel like I've talked massive shit on naturopaths. I think naturopaths are very important for some individuals. I just think a lot of them tend to be a little bit wishy-washy and not have the best interests of their clients at heart.
I don't know any naturopaths.
I know a fair few now.
You do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I'm sure I would have spoken to one before. I just didn't realize. But yeah, I've never actually discussed naturopathy with anyone before in my life.
I would love to have a naturopath on the podcast, as in like an open conversation of pros, cons, beliefs, miscommunications about naturopathy, and then how does it fit into people's lives.
Is that what it's actually called? It's such a funny name, naturopathy.
It is a bit of a funny name.
Can we get one on? Like,
Yeah.
Do you know someone that would be willing?
I can ask around. There's absolutely tons in Eltham.
Cool.
I think I share an office with two of them, so maybe one of them would be
Cool.
happy to come along.
Done.
Very interesting people. The majority of the time, they're very passionate about improving health from multiple different angles in a holistic fashion. And I guess a similar way that I would look at kind of running a dietitian session. It's not just about food. It's about structuring your entire life so that we can fit our goals into that in a realistic manner. I think some of them are really good at that, but I'm unsure. Haven't personally had that communication with people because I find that once I get on that side of Instagram, I'm getting anti-vax stuff. I'm getting lizard corruption in the politics and Donald Trump's an alien. I'm getting the moon never happened, and then we're all just living in a simulation. It's kind of a bit of a rabbit hole. I find there's a balance that it's very hard to find.
It is. But it's always like that on the internet, though. There's always extremes. And
Oh, absolutely.
I think it teaches a good amount of mental resilience that being chronically on the internet, which I feel like I kind of am, which is that no matter what happens no matter what other people do, what you would consider like your side or like your group of people, doesn't matter how poorly they act, it's not going to change your beliefs kind of thing. It's like if you were someone that was on the left and people on the left behaved really poorly about something, be like, well, fuck, I'm going to the right now. Like, hell yeah, like no way I could ever be a part of that. It's like, no, you still believe what you believe. They're just shitty people kind of thing.
Yeah, I find that once you have a discussion with someone and they may claim to be of a certain political view and have certain, let's say, moral codes, once you have the discussion, most people tend to be quite center. It's just that certain views tend to be quite prominent with some individuals, and then there's potentially miscommunication from both different areas.
Yeah, look, I think that, but then also at the same time, I think that because I'm of the same belief mostly, but I think at the same time, people are very scared to speak about what they actually think on the whole. Obviously, some people that aren't, but I think on the whole, most people are decently scared to talk about political stuff and what they truly believe in public settings, which is, look, it's fair enough. And so they will say things that are safe and things that are pretty central because you're not going to piss off too many people if you say that. And also, I think people that don't really give a shit about politics tend to be mostly in the center anyway.
Yeah.
Talking about resilience, this will be the last topic we discuss. But I've been thinking about it a lot recently, Matthew. And I'm going to give you the conclusion first. This probably isn't my final conclusion, but I want to give you a conclusion first. I'll do like one of those, those stories that starts with the ending first and then go backwards.
Oh, I love those kind of stories. Great movies.
I've concluded that resilience is the same as discipline.
Take me down the rabbit hole.
Well, I guess, what is resilience?
The ability to keep moving forward.
Yep. And what was that?
Water off a duck's back kind of thing.
So yeah, I think Professor Rad's correct. The ability to keep moving forward, right? The ability to, when you're feeling like shit or you're hurt or you've had something really bad happen in your life, to probably do things that you don't necessarily want to do.
For the benefit of yourself or others in the future. Right.
What's discipline?
Oh, that's good, Max. I like that. I like that bit too much.
Anyway, I don't know if I fully believe that yet, but we'll see. We'll see where things lead. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about because, like, well, then does that mean resilience isn't even a thing?
I mean, I guess it would be more so. They're definitely similar. I would more so describe resilience as I'm walking down the street. Someone says, "Hey, your hair looks extra curly today." Oh, that hurts. That's really bad. But whatever. I don't care. Keep moving. Versus someone else.
That's my other point.
Okay, go on.
If something awful happens to you, which is the point you just made, something awful happens to you, let's say your mum dies. Matt loves his mum more than anyone. If Matt's mum dies, and he knows he truly loves it, like there's not going to question his love. That's stupid. But in a week, he just feels fine. Like, yeah, he was sad for a week, but I don't know, he just woke up after 7 days and he's feeling great on a Monday, ready to go to work, excited. That's not resilience. That's just Matt feeling okay and normal again.
I think complicated things like the death or permanent removal of someone from someone's life is a bit of a tricky scenario. I wouldn't necessarily think it fits into a resilience thing. I think there's resolve, the ability to overcome barriers. I think there's a few different situations and factors that are going on there. I think more resilience is potentially those really short-term things that potentially can build up.
Yeah.
But things that I wouldn't necessarily think are massive problems. But for some people, maybe who have, let's say, low resilience. So if someone said, "Hey, your hair's extra curly today," and that ruins my day, that's gone. I would say I have relatively low resilience in that situation.
Yeah, for sure.
But for a discipline perspective, I don't necessarily think that applies. Discipline's more so making sure that we do the thing, continuing on, having that plan set in place to continue to reach our goals.
So I guess resilience could only be, where they differentiate, I like what you said. So where they differentiate is that resilience is apparent and works when you're not feeling good, and discipline is apparent and discipline is apparent when you're not feeling good, but when there's nothing that necessarily should be wrong in your life, but you still don't want to do the thing.
Yeah, I think discipline's more of a quantitative thing. It's like, am I ticking the boxes? Am I getting it done? Versus resilience being, can I push through? Is this a problem?
Because I guess the next question would be is, your mum's died, you feel shit, you don't do anything for a week, you're an absolute slob, you lie on the couch, you just cry the entire time, you don't eat, you don't sleep, and you wake up on a Monday and you're like, oh, I'm fine. And then you live your normal life and you're absolutely fine for the rest of your life. I don't think you're a resilient person.
Not to say that crying on the couch is not an unrealistic and not normal thing, because I would expect that from the majority of people.
Yeah, of course. But I guess the question for me is that if you feel fine and you just happen to feel fine in a quick succession after a tragic event happening to you,
I like to think of resistance and resilience as kind of a, like if you were to play a video game, like a percentage damage reduction. Hey, your hair's curly. Some people that causes 100 damage. For me, 0.2, whatever.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
really bother me too much.
Yeah. Anyway, something interesting to think about.
Thanks for joining the Real Philosophy Chat. I'm going to host a whole separate podcast and that kind of thing. That'd be interesting. Absolutely 0 views. It's only the hipsters in Fitzroy that are listening to the philosophy one. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Absolute legends.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for listening to the Real Health and Nutrition podcast. The sponsor of today's show is you. You support the show by listening and using our services of dietitian consultations and performance coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one consultations to help you achieve your health and performance goals. Any random bloke online can give you a generic meal plan where we here at R.E.A.L work collaboratively with you to reach your goals, making you feel heard and including you in your journey's planning. Our service offers tailored advice and can accompany meal plans and or realistic nutrition strategies which can be booked via our website www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. That's www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. Just a quick disclaimer, this podcast is for education, information, and general entertainment purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medical nutrition therapy or healthcare of any discipline. The content discussed in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute of professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please review our terms of use via our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.